Hi, Standoff. And our next presentation is from my colleague, Stanislav Rakovsky, who is going to tell us how to add payload to Pylnstaller. Hi, nice meeting you. I'm Stanislav. I'm from Positive, and I love to study unusual ways to inject payloads, and I have a blog. Obviously, it's not very interesting to work without a particular goal. But if we take PyInstaller and start study it, research into it, study its modifications and any additional opportunities to launch payloads, and also let PyInstaller find somebody like their own to launch Rick Astley. What is Pylnstaller? If you have a project in Python and you want to distribute it and not depend on user environment and not ask the users to install Python interpreter, then PyInstaller is what will help you to create one file out of your project that would be ready for further distribution. I'm going to tell you how it works for Windows, but most of it can also work for Linux as well. In terms of architecture, PyInstaller is not very much different from SAP6 or self-unpackaged archives. We have executable, portable executable. In overlay, we have our data, just as with 7-zip or WinRAR. Unlike 7-zip or WinRAR, in our overlay, we not only we have the archive, but a strange structure that even 7-zip cannot open. SFX archives, both WinRARs and 7-zips, can be opened by mere archiver. 7-zip will handle both. But there is one peculiar feature with them. They often go with a script, with a special script that tells you what CMZ teams are necessary to be executed before or after unpackaging the archive. It allows you to configure the environments, start a file, or execute the necessary script, run a necessary script after unpackaging. So if we want to use WinRAR to look at the script, you can either go to resources or just open this file with the help of WinRAR. But let us get back to the topic, to PyInstaller. There is a big difference here. Here we store a special structure, not just an archive, that consists of cookie, table of contents, and compressed content in the lib format. And you get to find the cookie in the overlay. And it also stores information on where the rest two structures are situated, their size. And this is done by Python interpreter. The table of content is there to provide us information as to how to work with the compressed content, whether or not the current resource, the unit of content, a file, a library, or this file is the main part of our project, the core part, like Mantai, that necessarily has to run because it does contain the code, our code. Later, we'll discuss types of content. And why not? We can also introduce changes into CPython, the standard Python interpreter, so as to add a new functionality. Like, for example, before the application stops running, we can execute a payload. On the other hand, if we defend our application, we can really considerably change the interpreter so as to make it very difficult and challenging to analyze it. We can change the code, then compilation programs would fail. They'll have to search for opcode, and we'll take the standard interpreter with DLLs and try to use it. But this way, we'll lose compatibility with multiple binary packages if we change the app code. What we can do also is anti-VM check, anti-debugger checks to make sure that we are in the environment that we're okay with. At that, it is doubtful that somebody would enter the interpreter first. Obviously, if analyst sees that the program is that it doesn't look like malicious, then he would probably pay at the modified interpreter. More to it, you can calculate its hash sum and see that something is going wrong. Besides, in the last version of third lineup of Python, there is a digital signature. So it would be an alert for virus analysts that something is wrong. Or reverse engineers, if this is about, if we are talking about protecting a legitimate software. Right, okay, moving forward, we can check the loader itself. We can change the loader itself. Since this is an open source project, we just go ahead and add the additional functionality. In the screenshot here, you can see compatibility benchmark. I took several open source projects. Keep or Sweep is the software, is a smart bin that allows you to decide whether to delete the file or store the file. Legendary is a loader for games, and various Python versions created with various versions of Pylnstaller. This is from PyInstaller program, a program aimed at unpackaging Pylnstaller files. So we take a project with version 3.6. We take it from the repository in GitHub. We find the environment to launch it. Here, Windows 2015 and 2017 will do. We assemble it, check it that it works, and then we start to search for the place where to execute our file. And indeed, we find this place. This is C file py launch. In the leftward CMD, we can see the result that we get after we somewhat changed the source code. So 3 points are identified there of interest to us. It operates all the modules. I mean, it is capable of executing before all the modules. And we can even get the title. And it's going to be very important later. For example, if you want to launch right before the main script, but after the environment is already tuned, then PyIboot 01 bootstrap is in charge of preparing your environment in such a way that the script that awaits the prepared environment and work very well. So if you have a standard script that operates just as being launched, but it also asks for OAS module that is only available after it's deployed fast, then it's reasonable for you to wait till it runs and then run afterwards. So we can see that the test module has been launched. We can see the mathematical computation as its output, and then we call inch loader that says that yeah, everything worked and we can execute something in the end. And then we just input print e, just as an example. With the py run simple string based on simple string club. Right, and on to practice. We want a software that would launch just like that with the script and execute our payload. And our pilot is to find the target. And the task is not to infect, but rather to modify, to find yourself, so as to transfer our body into some other software to keep replicating the payload. So we carry out the action of moving ourselves. We move ourselves and then we'll execute the payload, opening a browser with Rick Ashley. So then you either rewrite the file or open it with extension infected. But there is a challenge. We see that we have a string and a string with double symbols, and this symbols is very difficult to use straightforwardly in the code. So we coded with base 64 to make the life easier for the developer. And so this is how it works. We see the prepared environment. We pick the string. Let's compile our project. So we need a preliminary stage that would give us the base 64 coded string, and we input this string, store the file, repackage the project. The main part here is to launch our main process after the payload works. We can see that the resultant file asks for either something in overlayer or pkj package. This is part of overlay. You can cut it with the help of any effects editor. And you can see that the payload did work. Rick Ashley started running, but we don't have the target to infect. Let us add this target. Keep or sweep allows us to decide which files to store and which ones to delete. It's in Pylnstaller. We see that keep or sweep was infected. We'll launch it. We can see our standard interface here. Optionally, you can take this part out. You don't really need it. And so you can see that the payload runs once again. One thing to take into account here is that PyInstaller is in 4 forms, comes in 4 forms. 2 of them are modes with and without debugging, and 2 of them are console project-based and window-based. And we can impact which mode our project is going to be run. And we can also understand by the installer that we're infected, whether it's window-based or console-based. So it would modify itself accordingly so that our console window does not appear when it's not needed, and so that it does appear if it's a simple console application like volatility. What if we go further and try to inject right into the table of content? Then we won't have to worry about whether or not it is designed for console or window-based application, because this is the loader level. This is not the overlay level, right? So in this case, it doesn't really matter which PyInstaller we infect or inject into, because we just put ourselves into the loading queue and everything will run just fine. But in order to do that, in order to inject in the table of contents, you need to understand how it works. What Pylnstaller does first and foremost to start unpackaging, he looks for cookies. Cookies is the source of information on the length of Pylnstaller package, the offset in the table of contents, its length, the Python version, the title of Python library. We have an 8-byte magic that Pylnstaller works with to find the cookie. Cookie references table of contents. This is a pretty simple structure with the length and the relative location of data. It's like a sandwich with the archives, then address of the table of contents, and then cookie address. In yellow, you have position relative to the beginning of the overlay. Then what follows is length of compressed and uncompressed data, which is important to upload. There is a special flag on whether or not the file is compressed. It's usually always ticked, and we are going to use it as well. Type of data. This is how PyInstaller understands what to do with this particular object. In this particular case, we use S. We use S, and S means that this is the script that needs to be run. M's are just modules. You probably don't want to touch them at all. And this is how our thing works. And objectives are pretty easy. Our objective is to find PyInstaller archives we can touch, then find ourselves, our analogs. In this case, we are a compressed zlib archive. Then we change the table of contents of other files that we managed to find in order to integrate ourselves. And subsequently, we run our payload, Rick Ashley. So now on how Injector works. It's not that different from the principle used by PyInstaller itself. PyInstaller works with table of contents to unpackage, and we work with table of contents in order to modify it and integrate it into ourselves. In this case, a PyInst extractor is going to help us because it's also in Python and it also parses structures. So we will take a lot from that. We also have additional opportunities In this case, since we're in the structure and our name could be found, we can either use, for training purposes, a name like "look at me, ha ha ha," and inject at this name, or mimicry like pybot 02 bootstrap. So this way we can mask ourselves as if we were legitimate. And we have a way to run at a particular moment of time. It's not good for us to run right away because the environment is not prepared, the variables are not ready for us. A lot of modules are not accessible for us, like PS module is not available at this level, only after Bootstrap works. Only then it's available. So we may say that we only run after Bootstrap in this particular case. So we take away 1, 0, and we run. So we'll have the necessary environment. Starting with version 2 or 2.1, this is what we can use. And if we fail to find ourselves or analogs, we don't find the module after which we could run, we would run in the very end. Like here, we only run in the very end. On to practice. Have a look. We have a project and we have a target for infection. Our target even asks for QAC, which is even better because we are going to run our payload with administrator rights. We have a name that we're going to use to inject. We have a list of executed files. Let me get back to this one. It could be beneficial to us in certain cases to mask as if we are standard Pylnstaller bootstrap strips that would prepare the environment for us. In your POCs, you may want to use ha ha ha, look at me, or you fool. It only will be noticed by the analyst, and it's fun. In Inject after you have a list. In Inject after you have a list of modules, after which you should be run. We are going to launch them in the structure, and if in a queue we find a file with this name, then we'll inject right after this file name. If it's not found, then we'll run in the very end. Why is it needed? Thing is that before Bootstrap with 1, 0 and 1 works, the environment is not ready for us. We cannot use a lot of standard libraries. We don't have variables in the environment. Interpreter is not prepared to enter this world. It's too scary, and most of the scripts is not going to work. I mean, the reasonably well-written scripts that asks for multiple modules and that. So there is a special script that is launched in advance to prepare the environment. So that is why it's worthwhile to wait till it ran. If it doesn't run, then it's okay to run right after everything else. If Toc entry is not used, Toc entry, I mean. No, we also have here preparation for the multiprocessing modules, and then subsequently the main payload would follow. The one that was initially introduced on the stage of creating this. Right, so here is our injector, inject after. Additionally, we can either rewrite the already existing files or put them next to the previous one with net infected xlib. And our main task is to find, infect, and launch rig Astley. We need to compile and sanitize the object because interpreters are going to push serialized objects there. So we'll have a big time in to which Python version we work on. So we'll launch preparation, collected all the necessary files that Injector wants us to, and we see that the software works just as it should. We see the parsing. We see that we have a new file with infected suffix right after .exe. We see that the files work just as they should. And the fact that we have here this error is because of Pylnstaller. Unfortunately, we have an advertisement right before Rick Ashley. And let's now play with our infected files, or rather, modified. So we'll launch the previously infected version, and the rest of the files are modified, their copies are prepared, and here it is. Here is what we've been waiting for. We launched rig. This is the main goal in this project. This was my main goal. Because it is very important to demonstrate to others the opportunity to launch a random theme, whichever theme we want. So this way we can infect table of contents so as to roll ourselves out in other PyInstallers towards Python 2.7. For Python 3, you would also need to enter, and this would work, but we'll definitely need a different serialized object. We may want to drag along two serialized objects and store them in the form of module files. And in case we have Python 2.7 and we see it looking at cookie, then we would parse it this way. If it's 3.6.7.8.9, then we'll use the version, the corresponding version of the payload. So POC only shows you the opportunity to introduce a random object into the table of contents. It could be shared so that both versions of Python are supported. In this case, it's a bit easier than changing pet loader. Not bootloader, just loader. Because it's much less flexible to this kind of patches. Okay, so now we can inject in Pylnstaller. What next? We have multiple projects. And we can play with them. We can look which ones work, which ones don't. I've used volatility project out of this list, and also the project called swap or hide that allows to delete an application just like you work with Tinder. I used Legendary. It's a downloader for games and many other projects, more than 20, that uses PyInstaller, so you can play with it. And in case we are going to modify loader, we may cut the virus antivirus analyst unguarded. If PySprite is used in compile 6, we'll see that scripts are benign while the whole thing looks malicious. So the antivirus guy would be really puzzled. So some sources. This is the source with POCs and various tests that I created while working on this presentation. Pylnstaller, the main thing that we modified and tortured in different ways. The manual for Python C API. This reference manual will help you to create a better, more flexible PyInstaller in case you would want to go in the old way, just adding something new. PyInst extractor is a very good thing. It doesn't parse everything, but more than enough to have a basic understanding how PyInstaller works, so I highly recommend to use it. And wonderful icons that I used in this particular presentation and that I'm supposed to put anywhere, and links to which I'm supposed to input in my presentation. Thank you very much. So we've described how you can change Pylnstaller. We touched upon interpreter changing, modification, interpreter modification. We wrote a POC to transfer ourselves in other Pylnstallers by way of loader and as a part of table of contents. With this, I thank you for your attention.